Lisa Ruble from Quilty Zest, and I'm here today with Sit and Sew Fabrics to show you all the steps to sew a flannel leaf pillow. This flannel leaf pillow has fringe on it. All of the seams are on the outside, and then we cut them with scissors to create a cool fringy look for the whole pillow. The quilt kit comes with these fall color flannels that we're going to be using to make the pillow, and the instructions will tell you to make 2 pillows. There's enough fabric to make both. So let's talk a bit about a fringe project. If you've seen fringe quilts in the past, typically you use 2 layers of flannel so that you've got the backing as well as the front. Because this is a pillow with an envelope backing, we don't need to worry about what the back side looks like. So we're just using 1 layer of flannel on the front of our pillow. And we've got 2 applique leaves with fringed edges as well, and then 2 4-patch blocks. So the pattern will walk you through each step of this project, but in the video I'm going to show you how to do each part as well. And by the time you're done, you'll have 1 pillow done and know exactly what to do for number 2. So let's get started. So let's take a look at all the pieces we need to make these 2 pillows. The kit comes with 4 different fall colored flannels for the pillow tops, and then a lighter green for the pillow back. And from this fabric, we're going to cut large and small squares and also some applique leaves. So to make these 2 pillows, we're going to need large squares in each of these 4 colors, and then also small squares in each of these 4 colors. And you can find the measurements for these squares in the pattern that came along with your kit. And the next thing we're going to do is make the applique leaves. So this applique is done with fusible web, but it's done a little differently because we're creating a fringe pillow that has fringe around the edges of each of the squares and also of the leaves. So there's a little bit of texture and a little bit of dimension to this pillow. So you're going to trace the leaf shape onto your fusible web, and normally you would then fuse this onto your fabric and cut out on the line. We want there to be a loose edge around the fused section of the leaf so that we can fringe that edge. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut out this pattern on this line and then fuse it to the fabric. So I'm going to cut all the way around on the line. Then I'm going to lay my flannel piece face down and put my fusible leaf on top and use my iron to press it into place. Now that I've got my leaf shape fused to the back of the flannel fabric, I'm going to cut out the leaf shape, but I'm going to cut out about 1/4 inch beyond my fusible web right here. It doesn't have to be exact because when we do the fringing and then wash it, it will get that crinkle look to it, and so it won't matter if it's not exact all the way around. There we go. So here's the front of the leaf and the back. We're going to make a leaf in each of the 4 colors for the pillow front. So I'm going to focus on the pillow with the larger green and reddish rust color squares. And so for those, I'm going to use my gold and my yellow leaves. And I'm going to put the gold leaf on the green because there's a greater contrast there, and the yellow leaf on the rust. Now before I do that, what I'm going to do is fringe the edge of the leaf. So with the paper still on, so that I can see where I need to stop my cut, I'm going to just cut every 1/4 inch or so. And again, this doesn't have to be exact, but stopping right at the edge of the paper. So when you're cutting the fringe down at the base of the stem or in where there's a bit of an angle and at the top, you want to make sure that you don't accidentally cut a piece out. So you may cut a little less there. You can see at the end here, I've got my 2 corners, so I just put 2 cuts in the end and then moved up a little bit, because if you cut in too far, you'll end up cutting that off. So I've got my little fringed edge cut on 2 of the leaves, and I've got to tell you, that's a lot of scissor work, so I'm going to work on assembling this pillow before I do any more of the cutting for my second pillow, because my hand hurts from all of that little cutting. But the sharper of scissors you can use, the better, and I use my big scissors, but I just do the little tip of it, and that allows you to control where you're cutting. So now I'm going to take the paper off the back side of my leaf. I'm going to bring my leaf over to my ironing station and position it on top. I want it to be on an angle. Make sure none of my fringes are tucked underneath, and make sure that it's centered but also away from the edges, because we'll be fringing those edges as well. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to use my iron and press it down. Now after we fuse this in place, we'll be stitching on the leaf as well to help hold it to the flannel, but pressing it down is a good start with the fusible web. Okay. And do the same thing with my second leaf. And then I chose to use a gold colored thread because I'm just going to use the same thread through the whole project. So a thread that coordinates with your flannels will make that sewing much easier because it won't show quite as much. So now I'm going to take my leaf over to the machine, and you can see, I can kind of see where the fringe is, and I just want to sew inside that fringe line. So at about a 1/4 inch in from that outer cut line to secure the leaf in place. And if you want to get fancy, you can even do a vein up the middle, just a little decorative stitching if you want. I've got both my leaf blocks stitched, and if you look, I did a little vein down the center. So now it's time to start assembling our small square 4 patches so that we can put our whole pillow top together. So I've got mine laid out with the 2 4 patches that are set up in the same direction. And what we're going to do is sew 2 squares together in 2 rows and then join them. But instead of sewing right sides together like we typically do, we're going to sew wrong sides together to create the fringe. So I'm going to lay these 2 wrong sides together and sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance down the one side. When you're sewing the 2 squares together, I recommend back stitching at the beginning and the end, because even though these seams will be stitched over, they're going to be handled a fair amount with the fringing. So I'm going to lay down this set of 2 and this set of 2, and then we're going to sew these together. And same thing, we're going to go wrong sides together, and I'm going to match the centers here, that center seam, and I'm going to push my seams open because that will maximize the fringe. I'm going to put a pin in on each side to hold those seam allowances and also keep my center fairly well aligned, even though it doesn't make a huge difference. And then same thing, I'm going to sew down this edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance again, right sides out. And here's my 4 patch block, seam allowances and all. So I'm going to make 2 of these, and then we will put our pillow top together with our 2 4 patches and our 2 leaf squares. And now it's time to start sewing things together. So we're going to join a 4 patch and a leaf block for the top row and for the bottom row, and in the same way. I'm going to put wrong sides together and pin it. And what you want to do before you do that is just double check and make sure you've got the leaves going in the direction you want. You've got your colors set up in here. I have it laid out so that I don't have the same color big square background next to a little square. So I've got it oriented so the reddish rust don't touch and the green don't touch. So I've checked my layout, and I'm going to pin these 2 together. We don't have a seam allowance to match this time, but I still want to pin those seam allowances flat so that I sew over them without bunching them up. Okay, one last seam across the middle here for our pillow top, and I'm going to go wrong sides together again and open that seam allowance. And then pin so that my seams match up fairly well. The fringe will hide it if they don't match up really well, but it's always nice to try in the first place. Okay, so I'm going to pin at both ends so I know that this all lines up, and then go back and get these 4-patch seams pinned in place. There's the one, and then flip it over for the other one. And if my pin heads are high enough, it won't matter that the pins are on the back side of what I'm going to sew, because I'll see them to pull them out. So one last 1/2 inch seam all the way down, and our first pillow top will be complete. Here we go. Doesn't look like much now with all those seam allowances showing, but once we get it fringed, it'll look great. And don't forget, when you are sewing the blocks together as well, make sure you're backstitching at the beginning and the end. So next you can either assemble your pillow front and back, or you can do some fringe cutting. And I like to do the fringe cutting now because, like I said earlier, my hand gets tired. And so if I spread it out throughout the process, I'm not doing all the fringe cutting at the end. So what we need to do is go to all of these inner seams and cut the fringe. And where you've got double layers, you can cut through both sides at once. Just make sure you stop short of your seam, because you don't want to cut through that. We will fringe the outer edge after we get the backing put on, so leave the outer edge alone, but do all of these exposed seams on the front. What I find easiest is to fold the pillow, so I've got a seam allowance edge exposed to me, and then just cut through both at once. Again, making sure not to cut through the seam, and then also starting in about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch from the edge, because we'll be sewing along that edge as well when we put our pillow backing together. One more cutting detail I want to show you. When you get close to a seam that goes across where you're cutting, what I do is just cut close to that seam, that intersecting seam on both sides, and then that frees up this seam to cut along between the seams. So I'm going to do the same thing down here from both sides, and then I've got this real easy to cut. So I've got all my fringe cut, and I need a little massage for my hand after all of that cutting, but it feels good to get it done. And now the next thing is to put our pillow back and pillow front together. So what you need to do is take your 2 backing pieces, and on one of the long edges, fold the fabric over a 1/2 inch and then a 1/2 inch again to create a nice finished edge, and then stitch all the way down that edge. So I've got this nice finished edge for the back side of my pillow, and you're going to do that twice. So you'll have 2 pieces to create an envelope style pillow backing. So what we're going to do is lay the pillow top right side facing down and flatten it as much as possible, which is a little tricky with all of those seams. And then we're going to lay a backing piece on top with wrong sides together. So really opposite what you typically do with a pillow. And then I'm going to pin the corners to align those, and then work my way around. Make sure I've got it as flat as it can be. And same thing I've been doing, where I'm going to look at this seam allowance on the fringe side and pin those little flaps down, and then flatten it as much as I can, heading down the edge to my finished hemmed line. Put a couple more seams in, and let's see. I do have 1 seam allowance right here. So I'm going to pin that as well. Okay, and then go down this side, flatten it as much as I can, pin the end, and pin my seam allowances. Make sure your raw edges match up as much as you can. And again, we've got some wiggle room because of the fringe. Okay, and then I'm going to take my second backing piece, scoot this up a little bit, and lay it wrong sides together on top. And same thing, I'm going to pin in the corners to secure it to the size of my pillow front, and then find my seam, and then try to pull this edge, not taut, but try to get as much of the wiggle room out of it as you can. There we go. And now the last step is to sew all the way around the pillow with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to sew, even though my pins are on the back, I'm going to sew with this side facing up, because then I can just double check that the seams that I've pinned down haven't gotten squished over on themselves, and so I can just see kind of where I'm working. So I'm going to stitch all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I want to show you what I did in the corners. Instead of getting to the corner point and pivoting and keeping going, I stitched all the way to the seam allowance and then started and stitched all the way again, just to give a little more stability to what will be a handled part of the pillow. And also don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and end of all of these outside pillow seam lines, because they will definitely take the most wear and tear. So I've got my pillow all assembled. You can see the envelope in the back. Now the last step before washing this, to give that fringe all of that fringy goodness, is to go around the outside edge of the pillow and to clip and make those little fringe cuts all the way around the outside. Make sure that you do not go through that sewing line, but clip all the way around and then throw your pillow cover in the wash. You can even just do a short cycle, but the agitation of the washing machine and the dryer will make your fringe have just a great effect to it. And then we'll put our pillow insert inside. Here's my pillow, fresh out of the dryer. I put it on a quick wash cycle and then put it in the dryer, and then put my insert inside through the envelope on the back of the pillow. And if you take a look at it, you can see that my fringe has done some fraying. A couple more washes will have the fringe do even more fraying and give you a great look for your pillow. But this is how your pillow goes together. And you've got fabric to make a second pillow, so you've got 2 cozy flannel pillows to use all fall on your couch. Enjoy!